Hello everybody, this is a brief tutorial on how I created this effect in TouchDesigner using a 3D depth camera. So the camera I have is an Intel RailSense D435, though the camera shouldn't really matter. There are plenty of other options available, and if you do not have access to a depth camera, I have seen some good AI models for detecting depth in a standard RGB camera, so give it a go, you might actually have quite good results. Okay, so to begin in TouchDesigner, let's clear out everything and add in our camera feed. Switch to depth, and hello, there I am. Right, so there's a lot of settings here that are specific for the RailSense, so I'm going to skip over most of them. The only one I'm really interested in right now is the maximum depth, and that's really just to kind of blank out the background, and that way we get better detail in the foreground. Next thing I'm going to do is crop this off. As you may see, there's a lot of artifacting around the edge. That's kind of just how these cameras work. So a simple way is just to zoom in very slightly, and also we do want to have a square aspect ratio. So let's do that. Just gonna zoom in ever slightly, equally please. There, that's great. Next thing I want to do is invert these, as I want the white values, which would be 1 to 0, to be slightly higher. So I'm just going to invert that and then punch up the range. So we change 0 to 1 to be 1 to 0, that inverts it. And then we'll add our levels in just to brighten this up slightly. Cool. The closer you go, you get white, and when you get very close, you'll get this mad, crazy artifacting. That's just a limitation of the camera, but I actually really like it. I think it's kind of cool, so just going to leave it there. Right, so that's pretty much everything we need for the camera, so let's work on the grid. The grid will be geometry. I'm going to skip over a lot of details on how exactly this is done. I'll link better tutorials down below that go into a lot more detail on what's happening. Simply I'll be using a grid sub, creating 64 by 64 grid. And we're going to have a circle for the element. We'll have a material of a constant color, say slightly off-white. And then we'll pipe all of that into a geometry comp. Great, let's add a camera as well. And again, I am skipping over a lot of information here, but I shall leave a much more in-depth tutorial that others have covered much better than I could. And then finally a render top. And the last thing I want to do is just transform this to have a background of slightly, very, very dark grey. Give it an alpha of 1, and then comp over background. Oh, I need to add the material to the geometry. And there we go, there's our dot, brilliant. Right, so now we have one element being rendered. We're going to instance using the grid. So come across on the geometry comp, come across to instancing, enable that, and then drag our grid into default instance. And now we have access to the X and Y information. And there's our grid, but our elements are much too big. So let's just bring them way, way down. Maybe a bit bigger. That looks good. And it looks perfect in the geometry comp, but not in our camera. That's simply because our camera is just much too close. So let's zoom the camera out a bit. All the way down. And I want to leave a slight border gap as well, just to, because some of these elements they're going to move in the Z direction towards the camera, so it would be quite nice just to have it gap around the edge. Great, so there's our grid. We've got X and Y information for the grid coming from the grid, and now I just want to get the depth information coming from our camera feed. So coming back over here, add a null for good practice, and then we're going to pipe all of this into chop data. Great. So here's the chop data. We have RGB, but we're really interested in one value as it is black and white, so the R is fine. We want to output as a single channel, and oh, before I do this, I need to resize this to match the grid, because right now this is the 1000 by 1000. We need to scale this down to match what our grid is going to be. So let me just do that, and make sure that is 64 by 64. And we're going to change the crop to be full image. So there we go. There's our image and chop data. And I'm just going to rename this to depth. And now what we want to do is we want to combine our depth information with our grid data. So the way to do that is with a merge. And for the grid, we're going to have to convert that into chop data, and then we can pipe it in. Great, so we've got our TX, TY and TZ coming from the grid, but we don't actually need the TY, so I'm just going to add in a select top, or select chop, sorry. And we're only interested in the TX and TY, and let's rename that to X and Y for simplicity. Great, and now what we can do, coming back to our geometry comp, or yes, our geometry comp on the instancing, let's replace grid with our new merge data, and then we have access to X, Y, and depth. Great, so as I move around it is actually working just very, very slightly, and the reason for that being is the depth information is only going from 0 to 1. So before the rename, let's quickly put in a math, and then let's bump that range up to say 20. That's pretty good. 30, bit too much. Let's go for 25. Something else you'll notice here is it's very fuzzy, and part of the reason is that is we've got absolutely no smoothing on here. It's very jagged pixels, so a quick simple fix for that would be to add some blur, and let's do it before we scale it down on the fit. And then as we kind of change this, it becomes a lot softer. Yeah, that's looking much, much better there. Cool. And again, there's a lot more you can do with it. One thing I actually recommend looking into, perhaps adding a feedback. That way you could be able to kind of have some nice kind of trails fade off as you move around. And then the last thing I want to do here is to also affect the scale. So what we can do is in the geometry comp we can use depth for scale, but that's been the scale, or sorry, depth is going from 0 to 25, and that's just much too much. So what we can do, let's just duplicate our math and change that down to say 2. Add in a rename, and we'll call this scale. And then again we can plug that into our merge, and now the geometry comp will have access to it. So we just add in scale. And there we go, that's pretty much the basic effect. Last thing I want to change is I don't like the way it goes all the way to 0. It'd be quite nice to have this kept at 0.1 or 0.2. Oops, have 0.2 here. Yeah, just so you can see the dots at all times and they kind of fade up. And perhaps 4, is that too much? Again, I could be here all day playing, this is a lot of fun. But this is the magic, this is the best part, playing around, changing the values, seeing what works, what doesn't. Enjoy. This is the basic effect, there's really not that much to it. Simply create your grid, process the input image, convert everything into chop data, and then pass it into an instance array, and you're done. So hopefully that was helpful. If you have any questions, just let me know. Bye.